Hey everybody, today I'm going to be reviewing Paris, Texas. This film came out in 1984. It was directed by Wim Wenders. Wenders is a German filmmaker and he's a writer and just all-around artist. And he wanted to make a film that kind of revolves around the American dream, that is exploring the American environment. But of course, this is made by somebody who lives across the pond. And I think that always lends a different perspective. And that is one of the things that is very refreshing about this film because it is very beautiful and it is poetic and there is a keen attention to detail and composition. It has obviously a very European artistic sensibility. It's made by a person who is seeing America very externally, through its own cinematic genres that it made so famous and, all of that romanticism. Even if it is a unique vision, at least for the time in which we are experiencing the Western culture, a lot of the themes are very universally human and also very modern. I see this movie on a basic level as, it's about the destruction of the nuclear family as it existed in America in the mid-20th century. And we saw a lot of movies like this in the 1970s, especially with that type of feminism at the time, a lot of estranged mother characters, divorced parents, etc., etc. This film, though, is quite simple narratively, and it begins with a very lonely, mysterious man who is slowly returning from the desert into civilization, and he seems to be a mute. He has a very peculiar walk and just a strange way about him naturally. And he is discovered and they identify him, and eventually they are able to contact his brother Walt, who is played by Dean Stockwell, and very much to his surprise because he hasn't seen his brother Travis in about 4 years. So Walt comes to reunite with Travis, pick him up, take him back home, and reunite him with his long-lost son, again, who he has not seen for 4 years. And it's actually been Walt and his wife Anne who have been taking care of the child this whole time. And when Walt first reunites with Travis again, of course, Travis, he seems so shook and almost like he's really traumatized. And it's like Walt has to constantly keep track of him as if he is a child. Travis is refusing to speak. He's refusing to fly. And it's very frustrating, naturally, for Walt. But I also find their camaraderie, just the style of their acting between them, to be quite genius. Curious, but also very funny. It's wooden, but it works in a way almost like it's badly dubbed. And there's something lonely and disconnected about that, but also very funny. It has a very Lynchian quality. And I think of all the filmmakers you might associate with this film as you're watching it, maybe the first time, I think Lynch is probably the person you might draw comparisons to the most. And I think that's partially because of the themes and because of the look, but also just because, you've got two actors at the center that Lynch famously used. But yeah, again, the stilted nature of it I think really works, and slowly new shades to these performances are going to be revealed as the movie goes on. I love Staunton as Travis. I think this is one of the great performances because there's just something about his face, that worn melancholia, but also just a sort of twinkle and innocence in his eyes, a natural humor, a natural softness, even though there is mystery. But always, he just has this look of like a disheveled cowboy. I love how unstudied he seems as an actor and just not very fussy at all, and how naturally and acutely the clarity of emotions can come forward because of that. And the effortlessness there, I think, and this is true, I think, of a lot of really great performers, is this person I don't think realizes how talented they are or just how much a gift they have of relating to a camera, just in a cinematic way. And it's the perfect face for this kind of performance because, it's misleading in a way that feels very convincing, just because, like I said, he is kind and he has like a soft-spoken nature, but there is a lot of information that is going to be withheld from the audience about him, and we're not going to find this stuff out until the third act. So there's a lot that is untapped that is going to eventually surprise us, and it's this style of storytelling that I really, really love when it's done well, just withholding key information, especially when it is about our protagonist that is going to completely change the course of the narrative. One of my all-time favorite examples of this is a movie from the 1950s. It's called A Lonely Place, and it's directed by Nicholas Ray. And it's a movie that, it stars Humphrey Bogart, and you think it's going to be this like sexy murder mystery type of thriller, but then it becomes something completely different, and it starts to remove itself from that initial romanticism, and it reveals this like really raw and brutal human emotion at the center. And I did mention too that, the look of this movie is very Lynchian, and it looks almost like it is suspended in some sort of abstract cinematic purgatory, where a lot of the illusions and the themes are kind of loosening up and hovering around us in a very haunted way. And the whole movie is living in this hazy sort of surrealistic place where like genres of the past are kind of like superimposed over barren roads and fields constantly. And yet at the center you have a very clear and concise sort of story that is about familial love at the center, and Travis has to be able to face his past in order to progress. And all of this feels very tangible to me. And so when I look at Travis and just his immediate family, him and the mother and the son, I look at everything around him, especially, other characters around him, and it feels like the rest of everything is almost like a spinning out of these abstractions and themes, all kind of deconstructed and sparkling and kind of scattered into a million pieces in the air in a really beautiful way. And we have to fit a lot of these pieces together ourselves, because basically this is going to become very much a kind of cinematic moral house of mirrors, quite literally in some ways. I think when it comes to this entire movie, though, I think one of my favorite parts about it, and it's something that I think a lot of people don't really focus on, is the second family. It is Walt and Anne, Travis's, brother and sister-in-law. I just find it curious conceptually, just because there is a strange mirroring going on between, Travis's family and then Walt's family, and almost kind of this parallel universe sort of feeling. I see Walt and Anne as representing a certain type of American family that is different from Travis, but, it represents success, it represents business and stability. And this represents all of the things that Travis no longer has, like this family that he doesn't have. He doesn't even have his own son at the beginning of this movie. And again, there's something very curious about it in the mirroring. Even Anne, she looks a little bit like his ex-wife, just in certain angles, certain lights. And she's the main maternal figure here. And she's also, really from France. She's not from Paris, Texas. She's actually a foreigner. But at the same time, there is something kind of removed about her due to that. And I think all of the women in this movie, there's a certain disconnect between them and the men, naturally because of the way we filter our realities due to romanticism. You look at Walt and Anne, and they don't necessarily seem like soulmates. And they really don't seem to have much connection beyond keeping Travis's child, Hunter. But her identity seems to be so wrapped up, of course, in being a mother, naturally, as she's been for the last 4 years. And the idea of her not having Hunter anymore is absolutely devastating to me. But of course, as Walt points out, rightly so, that is Travis's kid, and it is his right to do whatever he wants with him. And in order to self-actualize, he has to reunite the boy with his real mother. This is at least true in his mind. It completes a certain cycle for him, certainly. And to reunite one family, he kind of has to tear apart another. And again, all of that is what really is really hard for me, because what happens after this? I don't see much keeping Walt and Anne together besides the child. So there's a mirroring there, and also just that meta unraveling that kind of represents those two, I think. Stability, and yet there is an emptiness in their relationship compared to Travis, who is somebody that seems to have a lot of love and a lot of intensity in him. Yet he is alone. And when you look at his estranged wife, Jane, who finally comes into the movie later, she's even more beautiful than Anne, for sure. Dangerously beautiful. The kind of beauty that is so voyeuristic and desired naturally by men in the world that it couldn't possibly be humanized or understood. She couldn't possibly be real or treated as a human. And of course, with the title and Travis, talking about that scene, where he's talking about my mother, was from Paris, ... Texas, and that's, obviously a gag. But the whole thing means, obviously, she wasn't glamorous, and she wasn't romanticized in some sort of, European way. She's plain and simple, but she was kind. And unfortunately, that's something that is overlooked just because of the expectations we have. But it all does come down to the final act, and how Travis obviously is going to confront his ego and his loss through his estranged wife and meeting her again, having to face that idealized fantasy. The epitome of voyeurism, and it's almost as if he's going to explore these illusions. He's going to lift the curtain and kind of see the wizard, so to speak. And I know I complain a lot about third acts on this channel when it comes to movies, but yeah, when it comes to this movie, I think it's probably one of the most breathtaking final acts of a movie you'll see. You have some of the most visually poignant images, I think, in the entire film existing, especially in this sequence, which is really saying a lot. There is just a very slippery feeling, not just in this sequence, but throughout the entire film. It's really felt here for sure, though. And it's a sense of, again, Travis is just waking up, I think. This whole scene and this whole performance, it'll absolutely wreck your soul. At least it did for me. And I think part of it is just the disconnect. It's like a reuniting, but it is so removed at the same time, because the only way that he can see his wife is through this, reflective mirror sort of situation. And it is a brilliant way of not only lighting the scene in a really clever way, because it speaks to a lot of things, I think, visually and metaphorically, but it's this idea that he can only see his wife through a screen as this very objectified sort of image. And yet he has to turn away from this image, not even look at her when he is revealing this confession to both her and the audience. And I think that moment, especially the way he changes his body, it's very telling. But that voyeuristic thing, is just, it's very interesting to peel apart. And even just now, a bit like watching me through a screen right here, it feels very intimate when you're watching somebody. It feels like you have a friend who is directly addressing you, but yet in reality, you don't know the person or the realities of their life. It's really just all an illusion. And in the case of Paris, Texas, and the illusion there in that image, it's just obviously this woman here is an unattainable object of desire. And just the colors, I love that pink sweater that she wears because it's warm and yet it's very tart at the same time. It almost bleeds under those lights, and yet there's something that is kind of vibrating from it. Just the bright of the pink here and how it brings it out in her lips and everything. I just think it's so impeccable. There's such a danger to her. And building this film to this moment, I think, demands one of the most captivating of faces, and they found her here. I think she's absolutely perfect. But I think one of the real questions people have is, when the sequence is finished, why is it that Travis can't rectify things? Why is it, this dream of a stable home that he has and that he wants cannot exist for him? And I think it's a really kind of a complicated answer. I also do think it's abstract and you don't necessarily have to look at it as very realistic, but I do think when you examine Travis and really think about him, it's like, especially, in the context of the movie, it's like, how could the man go back? How could the man go back after he is destroyed so much? It completes the cycle and it allows one right to be written in a very traditional sort of sense, but also, again, ripping apart another family, while the protagonist at the center finally finds one aspect of himself that he had missed. Once he recognizes the danger and the web he was trapped in, and then he can give up the thing that he wanted the most, suddenly I think he's free. In a very sad sort of way, but he is free. And I love that the movie is always this give and take sort of situation, that one person's highs equal another person's lows, and this is just the bitter truth of life and the American mythos. It is the archetypal power, though, that stands out to me about this whole movie, and whether or not it's realistic, as I said, or whether or not, Hunter might be better off with Anne and Walt, obviously. All of that is irrelevant to me because it ultimately comes down to the feeling of the movie, the melancholia of the Lone Ranger kind of riding alone in the American West, and kind of the pains it takes for a man to get there in his life, and yet it's something that we all recognize for sure and that we romanticize. I think that this is truly a masterwork of cinema. Obviously, it is a classic. It is a strange blend of like Hopper-esque sort of images and Western images and obviously heightened European style, all the ways we filter our realities to enliven, to deplete, to ruin, to love. I think it's just the emotional gut punch of realizing how much of our experiences as humans are filtered through the times in which we live, and how much of what we experience has kind of already been pre-written for us in the narratives, in the archetypal heroes that we fantasize about on the screen. There are a lot of meta movies that express this type of thing, but I think this one is very clean and simple and slowly drains this emotion out from us, and I think it's really extraordinary. Truly, it made me cry like a little baby, and I adore this film and I recommend it to cinephiles everywhere. Even if you're not a cinephile, I think it is accessible enough for people to get into it and really find it to be powerful. So yeah, obviously I'm going to recommend it, but thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to plug my website as always. It is deepfocuslens.com. I'm an artist. I do commissioned portraits and I sell prints of my work. If that is something that you're interested in, you can always go to the website below. And if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can email me. My email is in the description box below as well. Also, I'd like to give a shout out to my patrons who are wonderful. Thank you guys so much for your support. If you are interested in supporting, the link for that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.